Deos bluntly questions if he truly doesn't understand the situation. He points out that it was Rude who antagonized Chevelle and was subsequently targeted, just like the one they call a monster. The outcast, shunned by all, is the master from Ardion. The protagonist calmly affirms that he understands. He knows perfectly well the one orchestrating this is Shavel Van Hadaleo, and asks, "So what of it?" leaving Varys utterly confused. Rude challenges them, asking if they truly believe it's right that Lytus is labeled a monster and cast aside just because someone powerful decreed it. Deos admits it's profoundly unfair, but as he speaks, the protagonist places a firm hand on Varys' shoulder. "Then we're on the same page," he declares, leaving Deos slightly bewildered. Rude then turns his head, pointedly asking, "Lytus, what's your take on this?" Varys demands to know what he's talking about. Just as Lytus rises to his feet, emerging from behind the crates, Deos is taken aback, asking how long he had been there, the second prince of Ardion himself. Lytus starts to walk away without a single word, but as he moves, he trips and awkwardly falls. Met by the dead silence of Deos and Rude, the protagonist moves to speak to him, but Varys swiftly covers his mouth, whispering urgently. He questions what Rude thinks he's doing, explaining that nothing will change even if he tries to intervene. He warns that, in the worst-case scenario, Rude could end up exactly like him. Before any of that, the protagonist insists, "I have something to ask." Deos gravely warns him that he's being serious. Lytus remains silent and begins to walk again, but Rude quickly grabs him by his shirt, stopping him in his tracks. "We need to talk," he insists. Lytus coldly replies that it isn't necessary and continues to walk away. The protagonist grows irritated and wonders what that was all about. Varys calls out to Rude, demanding to know what his deal is. "And why did you want to talk to him so badly?" he presses. Rude retorts, "Isn't it obvious? We share the same room." Deos advises him to simply change rooms then, asking if Lytus's reaction wasn't a clear enough signal. "It's strange," Rude insists. "Why do they call him a monster? What actually happened? It took only a single month for the cruel nickname to take root." Following Aiden like a shadow as he walked toward his room, whispers trailed behind him, hushed voices questioning why he still bothered showing his face, claiming they would have fled long ago. They called him a monster, and with every venomous utterance, the word dragged him back into the haunting depths of his past. He remembered being younger, the weight of a life fading in his arms, and a phantom voice asking if he was to blame, but the vision shattered, and he snapped out of his own thoughts, finding himself standing just outside the door. Meanwhile, back at the warehouse, Dylan admitted he had no idea why the Master of Arden was called a monster. Rudy, filled with disbelief, simply said it was fine, and began to walk away. "Hold on," Ferris called out, urging him to calm down. "I know the story, just not all the finer details." He explained that everything began with Cheval, but it wasn't so terrible at first. Arden was only branded a monster after the incident, Ferris continued. Rudy stopped, his interest piqued. "What incident?" Darius clarified that he had only heard rumors, but the story began shortly after Arden first arrived at Helios. Several students from Eden had gathered in the library for a study session, and on that particular day, in that specific place, Master Arden is said to have transformed into a horrifying creature. The tales described him with 3 eyes, a body covered in fur, and even 8 monstrous arms. The protagonist stared at Ferris, his expression flat. "Are you joking? Because if this is some kind of prank, I'm going to hit you," Darius quickly interjected. "And that's why I said I don't know the exact details. I only know what the rumors claim." Rudy was left to ponder the impossible. Could a man really turn into a monster? The story was beyond bizarre. Darius then added a chilling piece of evidence. The library has been sealed ever since that day. From that, we can assume something truly catastrophic happened in there. But it's best we leave this topic alone for now. "Let's focus on moving you to another dorm," he continued. "Everyone in Eden already knows about your connection. It's just a matter of time until this information reaches the Harris dorms," Rudy confirmed. "I noticed. People's reactions to me were completely different from yesterday. So you see," Darius responded grimly. Rudy then asked, "What if I refuse to change dorms?" "Varys will probably shun him as well," Deos remarks, a look of confusion crossing his face as the protagonist firmly disagrees. "He won't," the protagonist insists. "That's simply not how things are done." A dejected Varys quietly concedes, "Perhaps I'll be able to believe that someday." As the protagonist and Deos make their way through the halls, a sea of eyes follows their every move. Rude notes that the uproar is just as intense as yesterday, yet the crowd's reaction feels markedly different. With a tremble in his voice, Varys speaks. He mutters that strapping a watermelon to his head would draw less attention, then nervously asks the protagonist what he's planning. "Are you actually thinking of challenging the Harrys?" he questions. Rude falls into a contemplative silence for a moment. Of course not, he finally answers. Deos presses. Then why did you hesitate? And why are you so set on helping Master Ardian? The protagonist clarifies that it isn't strictly about helping, privately reminding himself that, above all, this is a mission. As they approach the classroom, Rude spots Ardian sitting by himself, a thought crystallizing in his mind. If he does nothing, then nothing will ever change. He would be nothing but a coward, standing by while this injustice continues. Ardian is just a lonely boy, branded as a monster, and he is suffering immensely because of it. Deos, the protagonist calls out, prompting his friend to turn and ask what he needs. Rude states plainly, "We're in the same boat now." A bewildered Deos looks on, as the names of powerful houses like Laduces, Dion, and Ardian hang in the air, a silent testament to the lie that social status doesn't matter in Helios. Suddenly, Deos turns to the other students and announces his intention to change seats. He asks them to shift aside to make room. A bold move considering the silent, unspoken power of House Ardian is not to be underestimated. If Ardian had only declared his lineage from the start, things would never have escalated to this point. The other students watch, stunned. Whispers erupt as they wonder what Deos and Rude are doing, while a larger, silent majority simply observes the unfolding drama. Why do they remain passive? Why do they stay silent in the face of such blatant animosity directed at one person? That's a question Rude will have to unravel in time. With resolve, he and Deos drag their desks to sit beside Ardian. The gesture leaves Ardian utterly speechless. Later, during class, Professor Hial begins her lecture with a poignant observation. According to the ancient texts left by civilizations long past, she announces, "Wizards are known as the lions of God. They are also described as great saviors, purifying corrupted lands, vanquishing fearsome monsters. That noble description feels like a relic of a bygone era. Now, the title is tarnished by mediocre talents and unprepared fools who buy their way into the ranks. They parade around with a false sense of authority, yet this dilution doesn't erase a fundamental truth. Wizards are still our saviors. Even now, only a wizard can stand against the encroaching darkness, a fact that weighs heavily as Professor Hiles's lecture continues. Once the class ends, a wave of surprised whispers fills the air, as all eyes fix on one person. Rudy's voice cuts through, calling out to Leo. But Leo remains perfectly still, a statue amidst the stairs. Undeterred, Rudy raises his voice, demanding his friend's attention. As he urges him to answer, Theo rises from his desk with a sigh. "Rudy, I'm starving," he complains. "What's the point of this?" "So what?" Rudy retorts. But Vance, sensing the tension, suggests they head to the cafeteria to grab a bite. There, Theo tells Rudy to be realistic. "You know this is pointless, right? Nothing is going to change if it's just the two of us. Besides," he adds, "the person at the center of all this seems completely indifferent. That's even more reason for us to stay out of it." He presses the point. "Didn't you see him? Leo doesn't care whether we're standing with him or against him." Rudy quietly disagrees. "I don't know. That's not the impression I got from him at all." He remembers a small detail from class, a moment when he noticed Leo's textbook was being held completely upside down. "He was paying a lot of attention to us," Rudy insists. Vance just shakes his head. "No matter how I look at it, this isn't right. The very friends who used to laugh and joke with him won't even meet his gaze anymore," Vance says sorrowfully. "He's still there," Rudy comments plainly. "I'm not joking," Theo warns. "It's not too late to walk away from this." Rudy looks Theo dead in the eye. "So, your argument is that things won't change with just the two of us, is that it?" Vance questions what he's getting at. A slow grin spreads across Rudy's face. "In that case, we'll just need to recruit more friends." Theo urges him to be serious, but just then, a group of boys starts walking ominously in their direction. Rudy notices. "Well," Rudy mutters under his breath, "I think it's a little too late to back down now." Adrian Vaughan steps forward. "Are you Rudy Chrissy?" The protagonist affirms with a simple yes, then coolly asks, "So what?" prompting the young man he had previously bested. Irritated, the boy snaps that this newcomer, Eden, dared to stare him down and act Adric Vaughan immediately labels as insolence from Chrissy. Adric then states his desire for Rude to accompany him, summoning him to the central square a short time later. Obediently, Rude and Dios trail behind them. Once they arrive, Adric Vaughan dismisses his thugs with a wave, telling them they can leave. The young man who felt Rude's strength earlier stares in confusion, asking his leader to repeat what he just said. Adric replies flatly that he told them to get lost. The youth lets out a deep sigh and concedes. As our protagonist realizes, this is Adric. He recalls seeing him with Shavel von Hadaleo the last time. Adric finally breaks the silence, asking if Rude has any idea why he was brought to this place. Our hero replies that he hasn't a clue, turning the question back on him, asking if Adric brought him here without a reason. Adric answers that he'd heard Rude Chrissy was the last to arrive, a rumor that now appears to be true. He remarks on Rude's fearless demeanor before getting straight to the point. It would be in Rude's best interest to stay far away from that damned monster. The protagonist feigns ignorance, asking what monster he's talking about and commenting that he is completely in the dark. He privately wonders if there is a literal monster in Helios, but Adric's patience is wearing thin. He doesn't like people who play dumb. He leans in with a sneer, asking if it isn't a shame, questioning if Rude is trying to make himself feel better by taking in that pathetic worm. Whatever his reasons, he had better stop, because everything in this world exists for a reason, in its proper place. He tells him to stop meddling in matters he cannot possibly comprehend, and to start focusing on his own life, because if he gets any closer, Rude will find he has everything to lose and absolutely nothing to gain. The protagonist calmly asks, "Is that supposed to be advice?" Advice? Adric scoffs, stepping into Rude's personal space with a dangerously serious expression. No, he affirms with chilling certainty. It's a warning. As dusk paints the sky, Deos and Rude are seen sitting on the edge of the central square's wall. Our hero quietly contemplates the threat. A warning? Huh. While Varys comments that, if they insisted on poking the bear, this was bound to happen. Perhaps we should stop, Varys suggests. Rude looks over, asking if that's what they should do, but Diao remains lost in a heavy silence. He brushes the thought aside, asking what Rhys plans to do now. Rhys states that their first priority must be to secure an ally. He admits, however, that finding one will be a challenge, a problem best saved for later. For the time being, their focus must be on gathering intelligence. They need to understand the full picture of what has transpired. Dio's task is to search for anyone willing to help them, while Varys skeptically questions how Rhys intends to uncover the truth. Rhys explains that the most direct path is to confront Ludius himself, but there's a crucial first step. He needs to have a genuine conversation with the boy. Only then can he begin to formulate a solution to this predicament, a solution he's willing to pursue, even if it means defying Chevelle or shaking the very foundations of this academy. Rhys scans the area, realizing Ludius is nowhere in sight, and begins to wonder about his usual haunts. Meanwhile, the principal summons Mr. Ludius, her voice firm as she declares she will ask just one more time. She presses him, asking if he is truly certain that he's facing no difficulties in his school life. His response is a quiet affirmation. Everything is fine, he insists. The principal reminds him that she and Dana are colleagues, implying a shared concern for his well-being. She offers her support, explaining that he can confide in her, but adds that if Ludius truly refuses their help, then their hands are tied. Elsewhere, in a bustling school corridor, Rhys approaches a student, asking if he has seen Ludius. The student, visibly startled, claims to have never even heard the name, as whispers erupt around them, questioning why anyone would seek out that monster. Others mutter warnings, urging people not to stare. And Rhys realizes, with a sinking feeling, that the fear is so great, they won't even speak his name openly. Just then, a girl's voice cuts through the murmurs. "If you're looking for the monster," she says, "I think I saw him heading toward the west warehouse." Ludius was carrying monospheres, she adds, certain of the identification. Rhys offers his sincere thanks. A young man nervously calls out to Isla, questioning why she would dare speak to the stranger as others worry she'll be dragged into the trouble. Rhys pauses, turning back toward her. He approaches Isla directly and clarifies, "By the way, I'm not looking for a monster. I'm looking for Ludius." And with that, he walks away, leaving Ayla to think to herself what a peculiar guy he is. Rhodes deduced that the path to the warehouse lay directly through this courtyard. He reasoned it was the perfect vantage point, yet a nagging thought surfaced. What if Leduc had already passed by unnoticed? His eyes scanned the area, finding nothing, but then, a flicker of movement below caught his attention. It was him. Rhodes drew a breath, ready to shout his name, but he checked himself. A wave of caution washing over him. Was calling out from this distance, in the open, truly the wisest move? The courtyard was bustling with students. Adric's words echoed in his mind. This was meant to be a warning, nothing more. He paused, weighing his options. Then, shattering the relative quiet, his voice boomed across the space. "Leduc Ardian." The sudden call left Leduc completely stunned and disoriented. From his elevated position, Rhodes gave a casual wave. "Wait right there." But the moment the words reached Leduc, he broke into a frantic sprint. Rhodes watched in disbelief. "He ran again," he muttered, the memory of Leduc Ardian's earlier words flooding back to him. "There's no need for this," he recalled Leduc pleading. Rhodes's jaw tightened. "Fine," he thought grimly. "If that's how you want to play it." Without a second's hesitation, he vaulted over the railing, landing gracefully on the ground below, much to the astonishment of the surrounding students. The rules had just changed. He broke into a dead sprint, his voice cutting through the crowd as he yelled, "I'm coming for you, Leduc. Stop right there." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. "Rin, did you see that?" One student exclaimed to another. "That kid just jumped from the second floor." The chase tore through the school grounds, a blur of motion that left a wake of confused students murmuring about what could possibly be happening. A grim thought crossed Rhodes's mind. They had unintentionally made themselves the center of the entire school's attention, but that was a secondary concern. Leduc was shockingly fast, and the distance between them wasn't closing. Things had gotten out of hand, but catching him was all that mattered now. He poured all his energy into closing the gap. Leduc, glancing over his shoulder, felt a surge of panic as he realized his pursuer was gaining on him. In a desperate move, Leduc snatched a mana sphere, using its power to accelerate. "He's using mana," Rhodes noted with a hint of admiration. "Smart." His praise was cut short as another sphere slammed into his forehead. From the safety of a nearby fence, Leduc stammered, "I'm sorry." Rhodes rubbed the spot, incredulous. "Sorry?" he retorted. "If you were actually sorry, you would stop running. Why are we playing this ridiculous game of tag?" Leduc shot back defensively. "It's only because you started chasing me," Rhodes sighed. Prince Ardon frantically insisted that Rude had called out to him, conveniently forgetting that he was the one who had turned tail and fled first. Rude feigned ignorance, cupping a hand to his ear. "What was that? You'll have to speak up. I can't quite hear you from down there." He called out for Leducis once more, but his gaze fell upon Chevelle and his companions below. Instantly, Chevelle's eyes met his expression hardening with fury. The protagonist smirked, his voice low and menacing. "Finally, no more running. It's time we had a talk." "Don't come any closer," Ardon shrieked, a tremor in his voice that gave Rude pause. The prince repeated himself, his entire body trembling. "Just stay away from me." "All right, I understand," the protagonist replied with deceptive calm, stooping to pick up a forgotten mana sphere from the ground. "So, what did you think I was going to do?" he asked, before suddenly whipping the sphere at Ardon's head, the impact leaving the prince dazed and confused. In a flash, Rude seized Ardon by his shirt, pulling him close. "What will you do now that I am closer?" he snarled, his intense glare meeting the prince's wide, astonished eyes. "It's not complicated," Rude said, his tone shifting to something unnervingly casual. "I just want us to have a little chat." "Talk?" a powerful voice boomed from behind them. At the sound, Leducis was visibly startled as the formidable Shavel emerged from the shadows. Shavel placed a heavy foot on the prince's back, his voice dripping with contempt. What sort of topic could anyone possibly have with a creature like this? He then fixed his gaze on Rude. "You, kid from Eden. Answer me one thing. What could you possibly want to discuss with this thing?" But before Shavel could finish his taunt, Rude charged with blinding speed, slamming into him and sending him crashing to the earth again. Leducus and the fallen Shavel could only stare in utter disbelief as Rude stood over him in cold silence. Shavel's companions scrambled toward their leader, calling out his name in alarm. A low chuckle escaped the protagonist. "It seems you don't have very good balance." Still processing the scene, Leducis's hands went limp, the monospheres he held clattering to the ground. "Leducis," Rude called. "Let's go somewhere quieter." But their escape was cut short. Shavel surged to his feet, one hand clamped to his head in irritation, his face a mask of pure fury. "Are you trying to lose your life, you brat from Eden?" he roared. Rude's response was sharp and unwavering. "No. I want to live. So it would be better for you to let this go now," he warned. Shavel's face contorted with rage. "You insolent bastard. Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" he seethed. The protagonist simply met his gaze, unfazed. With a knowing look, he confirms the young man's identity as Caden Van, then casually asks, "And what else?" as if the rest had simply slipped his mind. He then seizes Caden's hand, pointedly questioning if he truly belongs to the vaunted high-level class of the academy, the ones who are supposed to be so incredible. Caden, seething with rage, yanks his hand back and demands, "What in the world is this nonsense?" He snarls, questioning where an insolent worm like him crawled from, before calling out for Anna, who promptly tosses a necklace into the air. The blonde-haired aristocrat catches it deftly, his eyes burning with fury as he declares he isn't generous enough to let such disrespect slide. He fastens the necklace, asserting that it's time for the commoner to learn a valuable lesson through this very encounter. A lesson about what happens when one doesn't know their place and continues to meddle in the affairs of Harrison. This is the consequence. The protagonist's eyes narrow, recognizing the jewel. Is that a monostone? And a high-quality one at that. He questions inwardly if Caden truly intends to use magic with it, his gaze fixed on the aristocrat who now clutches the glowing mana stone. Caden scoffs, declaring that it's too late for regrets or fear, commanding him to watch closely and witness the magic of a future archmage. The great Caden Van, he announces, vowing to demonstrate the unbridgeable gap that separates the two of them. At this, Rude turns to Lytus, asking where he's off to. Lytus replies he's going to find a teacher, to which Rude calmly agrees. Go on, call someone, Rude says, but Aiden interjects with a firm, no, I'm the one who needs to go, Aiden states, but the protagonist insists, telling Lytus he should be the one to leave. Lytus argues back, saying it would be better if Rude went, all while Caden grows increasingly irritated by their squabbling. Are you two seriously arguing in the middle of my monologue? He snaps, remarking that they still don't seem to grasp the gravity of their situation. Since they clearly haven't understood, he begins to chant an incantation, the words Raphael Cruz, Fell America, echoing ominously. Rude instantly recognizes it as a spell, and, not wanting the situation to spiral out of control, decides it's best to retreat before he's caught in the blast. But Aiden shoves him back firmly, his voice urgent. Didn't I tell you to get back? He urges him to run, and run quickly, promising to do everything in his power to contain the threat. Our hero saw right through the tough guy act. Deep down, the bully was trembling. Chevelle simply sneered, calling the entire scene pathetic. He then remarked that everyone seemed to be losing their grip on reality, especially Leduce, who was just spouting gibberish in front of him. The situation was insane. He questioned if Leduce had truly gone mad, all because one solitary idiot decided to give him some attention. Leduce immediately shot back that it wasn't like that at all, insisting he had no part in whatever was happening. But Chevelle used the nearby fence as a springboard, launching himself forward in a sudden, aggressive charge. He snarled for him to shut his mouth, slamming him hard onto the unforgiving ground. Leduce whispered that all he wanted was for this nightmare to last forever, because, he vowed, he was about to drag him through a living hell. In that very instant, a vision of his little sister began to form before his eyes. She beckoned him closer, her voice a gentle echo, saying the flower was beautiful. But just as quickly, the cherished image started to twist and decay. Her form became a bruised and demonic horror. Leduce's pleas turned to screams, begging him to stop. But Chevelle watched on in cold, detached silence. In a blur of motion, Rude lunged forward, delivering a sharp, decisive blow to the back of Chevelle's neck. He then scrambled over to Leduce, checking if he was all right. A furious Chevelle demanded to know if the protagonist had lost his mind. Who do you think you're pushing? He roared. Rude's voice was low and serious as he asked what he had done to Leduce. Chevelle merely retorted that the monster had clearly forgotten its sins, so he was simply offering a little reminder of his past deeds. The protagonist's mind reeled, wondering what could have happened, as Chevelle continued his tirade. He declared that a monster who doesn't know its place must be put down, and that Rude, it seemed, also needed to learn his station, and for that, he would be punished as well. The blonde tormentor then asked if he had a memory he desperately wished to never relive. Or maybe, he mused, a crippling fear he would do anything to avoid. He promised that whichever it was, he would manifest it for him to experience. Our hero processed the threat, a chilling suspicion starting to form. He was beginning to connect the dots, to see who was truly responsible for painting Leduce as a monster. That incident in the library, it all started there. He braced himself, realizing he might truly have to face this depraved individual. Just then, a teacher came rushing over, shouting and demanding to know what they were doing, ordering them to stop this instant. Chevelle seethed with irritation at the interruption, turning to our hero with a venomous look and spitting that this was his lucky day. She sprints onto the scene, her eyes widening at the sight of two boys sprawled on the ground, while Rowan masterfully feigns having been beaten. A thought flashes through his mind. Now is not the time to escalate the conflict. His gaze shifts, taking in the surroundings. He tries to piece together the confrontation that unfolded between Alara and Kael, just as the venomous whispers of gossip begin to slither through the school halls. All eyes are now on Rowan as students stare in his direction. Moments later, he is summoned by the professor. She questions him, having heard a wild rumor that he leaped from one of the academy's upper floors, and demands to know if it's true. Rowan, smiling coolly, denies it. Professor Hayes presses on, inquiring about the stories of him chasing Alara through the school grounds like two people possessed. He calmly replies that he would never engage in such behavior. The professor laughs, admitting it sounded absurd, but the students outside knew better. Eavesdropping by the door, they murmur amongst themselves, knowing it's a complete fabrication since they all saw it unfold with their own eyes. Professor Hayes reminds Rowan that he only entered the academy 1 month later than everyone else due to his fragile condition. Because of this, she believes it's highly improbable that he could have committed the acts described in the rumors. Only then does the memory of his supposed illness surface in Rowan's mind. When the teacher asks if his condition isn't real, he confirms it is, though in truth, he had entirely forgotten about his cover story. Professor Hayes simply tells him to be cautious. She warns that a relapse would put him in a very complicated position, as she cannot wait so long for him to recover a second time. She adds that if he, and Eden, develops a poor reputation with the heiress, his entire academic life will be compromised. After leaving the office, a deep sense of annoyance settles over him, realizing that in the end, he never truly got to speak with Alara. At that moment, Leo appears, running with an exhausted expression, and immediately starts demanding to know what happened and if he actually fought Kale. Rowan simply replies, they just met, but his classmate presses on, asking if the rumor now sweeping through the school holds any truth. Rowan asks what specific rumor he's heard, and the ocean-haired boy explains the gossip, that he was soundly defeated by Kale. The story goes that it happened while he was fooling around with Alara, but Leo quickly changes the subject, his concern growing. He asks with genuine worry if Rowan is really okay and if he was injured. Rowan insists that he is fine, but as his shaky voice utters Alara's name, a chilling silence falls over the hallway, and a wave of fear washes over Leo. And with suspense hanging in the air, he asks if the boy is truly gone. But Rude retorts that he's alive, and demands to know why on earth the thought of Lytus being dead was the first thing to cross his mind. He then announces they're leaving, and when Dio asks where, he replies that they are going to find Lytus. They push open the heavy warehouse door, revealing a cavernous space filled with towering stacks of boxes. The boy with ocean blue hair mentions that the kid was taken to the infirmary a short time ago, suggesting it would be a wise place to check. Rude expresses his doubts about this, but Dio confidently insists that no one could possibly be there. His certainty shatters, however, as his gaze falls forward, and fear grips him. Lytus is unmistakably hiding amongst the shadows. Rude calls out to him, asking what he's searching for on the floor, but Lytus remains completely silent, his head bowed. In a softer tone, Rude pleads with him to talk while they have this chance, even offering him a piece of candy. He sits down beside the trembling boy, urging him to ignore the cruel rumors that he's turning into a monster. He simply wants to know why Shavel relentlessly calls him a monster. A cold sweat begins to form on Lytus's brow. Chilled to the bone, he snaps that it's none of Rude's concern and tells him to leave, his voice rising as he begs him to stop caring. He pleads for him to just stop paying attention, crying that all he desires is peace. Both Rude and Dio are stunned by his desperate reaction. Rude presses, asking if his plan is to simply live hidden away while the world calls him a monster. Lytus replies with a muffled, yes, his face buried in his hands. He confesses that the reason is simple, he truly is a monster. In the silence that follows, Rude just extends his hand and offers him something. Lytus sees that it's the candy, but recoils in shock, as Rude calmly states that if he remains silent, he will go and ask Shavel directly. With a disarming smile, he explains that he needs to understand why they call him a monster, purely out of curiosity, and tells him not to worry. Lytus is simply unable to comprehend what he's hearing. Sometime later, back within the Academy's grounds, a new scene unfolds. An informant reports to Shavel that the boy he encountered is named Rude Chrissy, who had joined the Academy 1 month late. The official reason was a chronic illness that had weakened his body since childhood. Shavel scoffs, asking if this is meant to be some kind of joke. He recalls that when he found him, the boy was far too energetic for such a story to be true. The girl then adds that Rude is in the same dorm as the so-called monster. She even mentions the blue-haired boy by name, Dio, noting that they share the same class. She adds a layer of intrigue, revealing that Rude has accomplished something quite remarkable. He was the first student ever to achieve a perfect score on the entrance exam. Overhearing this, Chevelle can't help but crack a knowing smile. Suddenly, the young boy's audacious confidence begins to make perfect sense to him. He scoffs, wondering aloud if acing one simple test is the only reason the boy struts around with such arrogance. His companion asks for their next move, and Chevelle's response is cold and calculated. They must ensure Rude is prevented from ever climbing the Academy's hierarchy. As he speaks, the magic stone on the table begins to emit a strange, wispy smoke. The smoke drifts away, coiling behind a nearby bush, observing the two like a silent, unseen spy. It lingers for a moment before vanishing, returning to its master Tessie, whose curiosity has been intensely piqued by their conversation. Just then, the princess calls out for her, while her guard gently scolds her for toying with her food. The woman casually pops a cookie into her mouth, reminding the princess that in this place, she is not Tessie, she is Professor Raoul. Later that night, a communication stone activates, a voice from the other side inquiring about Rude's progress at school. The voice asks if he has made any friends, but our protagonist curtly dismisses the question as irrelevant. He reports that the mission's target actively rejects his assistance, constantly demanding to be left alone. Rude adds with a sigh of frustration that if the boy is this insistent, there is no miracle he can perform to change his mind. His master finds this strangely amusing and, ignoring the report, circles back to the question about friends. Annoyed, Rude asks if he should just return, given that his master is only speaking nonsense. The master quickly offers an apology. He then asks a more serious question. Does Rude truly believe the boy wants no help at all? Rude admits that he is not so sure. He can sense something is happening beneath the surface, something no one else seems to see, and he finds the students at the academy deeply unsettling. It is as if they have all been hypnotized, conditioned to completely ignore Lydusis while simultaneously branding him a monster. He identifies Chaval Hadelio as the architect of the situation, a surname that immediately captures his master's attention. The apprentice asks if the name is familiar, and his master confirms he knows it all too well before beginning his explanation. Hadelio, he elaborates, is an esteemed house that has been the cradle of high-level mages for countless generations. The current head of this household is the Marquess, a highly influential nobleman within the imperial castle's court. With this knowledge, his master suspects he grasps the underlying dynamics, explaining that the Marquess and a certain duke are infamous for their long-standing feud, suggesting the students' conflict is likely a reflection of their house's rivalry. Upon hearing this, the young mage admits he isn't entirely convinced by the theory of warring families. Although their mutual animosity is clear, he points out that from his observation, it is Lydusis who is suffering in a completely one-sided affair. His master thoughtfully asks if perhaps the boy might have committed some youthful error, such as stealing Chaval's sweetheart or a similar offense. He finds such a simplistic notion absurd. His master merely laughs, promising to investigate while urging him not to take it to heart. He clarifies that while the mission is vital, he truly wants him to embrace the academic life and even make some friends. However, sensing the conversation veering into sentimentality, the apprentice places his hand on the stone, severing the communication. He exhales slowly and rises, now contemplating the genuine possibility of a deep-seated conflict between the two noble houses. He concludes that, for the time being, his only course of action is to observe. The next day, in a different location, Elizabeth is poised on a balcony, contemplating why Ruby Montague would ever select such a place to reside. She muses that the girl possesses no real awareness of her surroundings, for if she truly wished to remain inconspicuous, she would need to address her abrasive personality. Elizabeth takes a slow, deliberate breath. She places her hand on the door and steps inside, attempting to sound cheerful as she announces her return. Yet, only a single fish lay on the floor before her. She sighs in exasperation, for Ruby Montague was gone. The fish muses that the girl went out for a moment, a comment that Elizabeth finds quite amusing. Guessing that his mistress has developed an interest in the human world, the monster asks if he swam there by some chance, and he casually confirms it. He even mentions finding several creatures much like himself, but the fish warns that this is hardly something to be pleased about. Besides, he points out an overwhelming smell of the sea clinging to him, and, for that reason, tells Elizabeth to get out of his sight. Elizabeth is utterly outraged by this, pointing out the irony that the monster, being a fish, smells the most of fish. He then sits down, demanding to know why he's in that particular form, especially since, as far as he remembers, Ruby Monroe instructed him to maintain his human form to get used to it. The fish simply replies that the form feels suffocating. Elizabeth finds this laughable, retorting that what's truly suffocating is being locked away. Since they're in the human realm, he tells him to enjoy it. The monster makes it clear that unlike a certain someone, he is not here to play around, a statement that Elizabeth finds rather interesting. In a flash, he grabs the fish's body and hurls it straight into the sea, telling him to go and play at once. After the splash, he calls out from the shore, tauntingly asking if the water isn't refreshing. Ganymede emerges in his human form, his voice laced with anger, as he warns that he is done with Elizabeth's arrogant and rude behavior. Elizabeth simply scoffs, remarking that the little fish's tiresome attitude never changed and remains as annoying as ever. At that moment, Ruby Monroe appears on the balcony, her eyes narrowing as she beholds the mess her two subordinates are making in the water. She demands to know what in the world they are doing after she explicitly told them to behave, then unfolds a piece of paper, her gaze fixed upon it. She realizes that her infiltration into Helios Magic School was a success. Back at the academy, a staff member is shouting for Professor Raoul. However, the one who turns is Kyle. Embarrassed, she asks if he happened to have seen Professor Raoul. He replies that he hasn't seen anyone, and as the woman stands there awkwardly, he continues his work, fiddling with the seals on the floor. The woman approaches, her curiosity piqued, and asks if that is the teleportation magic circle they will use in the Eden exam. She then asks if the professor truly crafted it alone, marveling at how incredibly complex it is. He confirms her suspicions, and she remarks on the rumors that they'll be using the tower's training room for the test. She admits that a teleportation magic circle of that magnitude is nothing short of incredible. Professor Hales smiles, adding that since it's the first major exercise of the year, they must give it their all to ensure everything unfolds flawlessly. She declares she expected nothing less from the famed professor, a true master of teleportation circles. A short while later, a loud bang on Kai's desk shatters the silence. A figure stands over him, demanding to know what the book is. Leo proudly replies that it's the information he nearly worked himself into the ground to obtain. He confesses his amazement at getting it all in just a single day. Leo admits it was a challenge, as every student he approached seemed to avoid him like the plague. Rudy observes the sheer volume of information and questions if anyone on that list could actually hold their own against Shavel. Leo clarifies that it's not quite that simple. For now, he's only identified the nobles and categorized them by their academic grades. A look of bewilderment crosses Kai's face. His friend, seeing it, defensively asks what that look is for after all the hard work he put in. Kai explains it's not that he's ungrateful, but he's uncertain how useful their academic rankings will truly be. At a nearby table, two girls are watching the exchange intently. Suddenly, Rin's gaze locks onto them. Her friend notices, asking her why she's staring so intensely, but Rin just brushes it off, saying it's nothing. Leo, however, insists to Kai that the list will definitely prove useful, urging him to take a closer look. As Kai scans the pages, the very first name that catches his eye is Utiharian Maria Canciole. The elaborate name alone tells him everything. She must be the sole individual with royal blood in the entire Helios Academy. Leo confirms this, adding that she's a direct successor to the throne, and everyone simply calls her the princess. She receives exceptional treatment, to the point where the school has even sanctioned a personal guardian to accompany her at all times. Leo theorizes that, if the Empire's own princess is truly untouchable, even by the professors, then not even a powerhouse like Chauvel could lay a hand on her. However, he suddenly realizes he's been shouting this information for all to hear, quickly ducking his head and praying that no one overheard him. The students were certain they'd heard correctly, his voice dripping with an undeniable pride that drew them in. Their curiosity ignited. They began to creep closer, desperate to uncover the scheme the two were hatching. Murmurs rippled through the group. Ever since Rude came to this academy, one whispered, "We haven't had a single day of peace." Another student shuddered, admitting, "I despise being in the same class. I'm terrified of getting swept up in his chaos." They insisted that if the monster incident hadn't happened, the two would have just found another powerful master to serve. Rin found her gaze fixed on him, but the moment his eyes shifted in her direction, she darted away, a flush of embarrassment coloring her cheeks. He noted her strange reaction with a flicker of curiosity but quickly refocused, turning back to Dio. "And the second person?" Dio's voice dropped. "The second is Lapis Juan, of the Nuadli Duchy. He is their one and only son. As the son of the Duke, his influence within the Academy's walls was immense. But what truly sets him apart," Dio added, "is that he's the sole heir." That was a difficult piece of information to confirm. He then revealed a crucial detail. Master Nuadli and Chauvel were both admitted to Helios in the very same year. Their relationship must have been contentious from the start, Dio speculated, which earned a slow, calculating smile from Rude. His hatred for Chauvel. "We can use that," Rude mused. "We'll have to bring him over to our side." Dio conceded. "That could work, but there's a complication. Master Lapis has never once managed to step outside of Eden." Rude's brow furrowed. "Not once since enrolling? Why?" he demanded, finding the situation deeply strange. Dio replied, "The prevailing theory is that his practical skills are simply not sufficient to earn him a place in the elite class." He elaborated that while the young lord possessed a profound understanding of magical theory, his ability to apply it was a different matter entirely. His practical magic was severely lacking. Yet, despite this lack of talent, he remained the popular heir to a duchy, and most importantly, he despised Chauvel. "So, is that useful to you?" Dio asked. Rude's grin widened. "Useful? It's perfect. Excellent work." Dio then mentioned he had tried to gather intel on others from the Harris family, like Chauvel, but their separate academy blocks had made it impossible. It was difficult to face the others, a sea of faces divided by the invisible lines of their respective classes. Utterly oblivious to their individual abilities, he simply offered the book, urging them to contribute whatever they could at that moment. Just then, two senior students strode to the front of the room, their movements commanding the attention of everyone present. Whispers rippled through the classroom as girls questioned if it was truly Leo, and what he was doing there, before the young man announced they came on behalf of Professor Evans. It seemed their scheduled lesson was cancelled. Instead, the professor had summoned them all to convene at the main stage. Their purpose was to prepare for the fast-approaching exam. Then, with a confident smile, he urged everyone to proceed there immediately. Leo's gaze drifted to the side, a knot of concern tightening in his gut when he noticed that Silas was not present. He racked his brain, trying to imagine where his friend might have gone, while at that very same moment, elsewhere in the academy, a grim scene was unfolding. A cascade of cold water drenched Silas's body as the group of tormentors sneered that he looked more like a soaked cat than a monk. The leader then questioned if Silas had finally understood his place, or if he was simply too foolish to grasp the reality of the situation. His position hadn't changed just because two others had taken his side. Just then, Mason approached, his voice cutting through the tension as he ordered them to stop. He reminded them that their purpose was not petty humiliation, asking if they had forgotten the real reason they were there. Another student quickly captured his attention, whispering urgently into his ear, and an intrigued smile spread across Mason's face at what he heard. He then issued a new order: bring the monster with them, declaring that the stage was finally set for their performance elsewhere. Meanwhile, Dean called out to Leo, urging him to abandon the search, as they had scoured the dorms, the warehouses, and every other conceivable location. He concluded that Silas had simply disappeared, and warned that they would be late for the mandatory assembly if they lingered any longer. Leo couldn't accept that his friend would just vanish like that, his mind racing as he desperately wondered where Silas could possibly be. Dean suggested Silas was probably just hiding, but cautioned that his failure to appear on the main stage would cost them precious evaluation points. He stressed that every single point was crucial. Leo reluctantly agreed it was time to go, and they started walking toward the assembly. Even as they walked, a chilling premonition echoed in Leo's mind, a deep-seated feeling that something was terribly wrong as all the students gathered on the stage. A murmur of confusion ripples through the students as they wonder about the teacher's mysterious absence. Manon steps forward, asking, "Is everyone accounted for?" When a student confirms, a faint, knowing smile touches his lips. "Excellent," he thinks to himself, then announces it's time to begin. Simultaneously, in another part of the academy, the actual instructor arrives to find the classroom eerily silent and completely deserted. He stands bewildered, unable to comprehend where his entire class could have possibly gone. Elsewhere, our protagonist, Rude, walks through the halls with his colleague. Their journey is cut short when Dio notices that their intended passage is inexplicably blocked, leaving him utterly confused. He wonders aloud what lecture could be so important that it would require sealing the doors, but Rude remains quiet, a different kind of suspicion dawning on him. He considers that the truly strange thing isn't the blocked path, but the fact that his companion knew of this supposed secret passage to begin with. Meanwhile, back in the main hall, Manon captures everyone's attention by holding up a crystalline ball for all to see. He explains that, before apprentices can become official mages, they are unable to wield magic without a monosphere or a focusing stone. Therefore, your very first lesson, he declares, is to learn how to activate the mana within these spheres. Manifestation is basic, but it is also the most important skill, he continues, his tone growing serious, which is why we have prepared a test for every one of you. He concludes his announcement by revealing they will hold a special class dedicated solely to testing their proficiency in mana manifestation. A student hesitantly apologizes before asking if their actual teacher is aware of this arrangement. The interruption clearly displeases Manon. In response, two of the elite students silently break away from the crowd and begin advancing on the student who dared to speak up. The questioner's face turns pale with fear at their menacing approach, and he is immediately met with a harsh and brutal response. A palpable terror grips the rest of the class, forcing them to watch in stunned silence, completely unable to intervene. "Are there any more questions?" Manon asks into the heavy silence. Instantly, every student averts their gaze, not daring to utter a single word. He finds their obedience pleasing and warns them that before starting, he will explain some key details about the monospheres they are about to use. He elaborates that these orbs were created exclusively for this test, meaning they will serve no other purpose. Their only function is to measure each student's proficiency. As he explains this, the sphere in his own hand begins to emit a soft glow. If you successfully manifest your mana into the sphere, he says, it will react by changing its color and the intensity of its light. He clarifies that one's proficiency with mana dictates the outcome of the test. A more skilled user would manifest a sphere with a clearer, more vibrant color, but he anticipates their weakened state. Knowing their condition, he expects the colors to be faint, shifting the evaluation to a different metric entirely. They will be judged solely by the raw, kinetic force they can channel into the sphere during a simple trial of target shooting. With a cruel flourish, he reveals the target, Lydia, bound and helpless on the stage. Mason explains that this is no ordinary target. It possesses a unique property, making it vulnerable only to strikes infused with mana, thus ensuring the test is, in his twisted view, completely fair. He issues a chilling command. Manifest your mana, imbue the spheres, and hurl them with all your might. That's all for today's lesson, he concludes with a sickening smile. Isn't it simple? A wave of pure panic crashes over the students, their minds reeling from the horrifying demand to attack one of their own. Mason's eyes gleam with malice as he ups the stakes. To make things more entertaining, he announces, a direct hit to the head will earn bonus points. Following this declaration, he snaps his fingers, and dozens of spheres clatter across the floor toward the students. He scans the terrified crowd, asking who will be the first to volunteer, but his gaze freezes on an empty space. What in the world? He snarls, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. Where is Rhodes? His associate mutters that it should be impossible, but Mason merely dismisses him as an incompetent fool. To him, escaping this trap was the bare minimum. Elsewhere, Leo watches the unfolding chaos, completely bewildered. The protagonist arrives on the scene, naively asking if the class is underway, when a classmate quickly blocks his view. Get back, the student warns frantically. Something is terribly wrong. We need to find a teacher. Our hero says nothing, silently taking in the grim scene. On the stage, Mason is seething with fury. Clark, his partner, nervously asks what their next move is. It's too late now, Mason growls. Just stick to the plan, he commands, enraged that his elaborate scheme, executed without Chappelle's approval, is falling apart. As his plan unravels, a new element of chaos is introduced as the mysterious white-haired girl calmly reaches down and picks up a sphere. Clad's voice cut through the air, asking who possessed the courage to begin, with the chilling warning that if no one stepped forward, a volunteer would be chosen. He then singled out a girl with wringing hands, pointing directly at her and commanding her to go first and take one of the spheres. She was visibly petrified by the ordeal, stammering that she couldn't, to which he coldly replied, questioning if she was certain of her refusal. He let the threat hang in the air that if she refused, she would simply become the next target. Terror washed over her as she looked to her sides for aid, but every one of her friends had turned their faces away, consumed by their own fear. She realized with a sinking heart that there was no way out of this, and so, with a trembling hand, she seized a sphere. Clad noted that, as he'd expected, the color change was faint, but told her not to be concerned. He elaborated that the important part was what came next, adding the cruel warning that she would earn the maximum score if she managed to hit the monster. Tears began to well in her eyes as she stood frozen, not knowing what to do, but he simply ordered her to proceed immediately. In desperation, she closed her eyes and threw the sphere, but the attempt was so feeble that it failed to even reach the stage. It was nowhere near hitting the intended target. Clad, looking on with clear disappointment, announced her disqualification. Without missing a beat, one of the arrogant students from the elite class stepped forward and confidently grabbed one of the spheres. Proclaiming that he would set a proper example for them all, he immediately launched it with deadly precision toward the target. The sphere struck Ludus squarely in the head. There was nothing he could do to avoid it, as he was completely bound and helpless. The crowd gasped in shock at the sight, while Clad clapped his hands, finding it incredible. See, it's not difficult, he jeered, before asking who was next. Dio, watching from a distance, was incandescent with rage at what was transpiring, and turned to tell his friend to fetch a teacher with all speed. But he was stunned to find that his friend had simply disappeared. In that exact moment, a new voice volunteered, and Clad turned to see who it was. It was our protagonist, a knowing smile on his face as he said he would like to try as well. The sight left Dio utterly startled, as it did Manong. He hadn't even noticed his presence there until that moment. Up on the stage, even Ludus looked on with deep concern as he saw him. And yet, the protagonist's calm smile never wavered, and as he stepped forward, a sudden, heavy silence fell over the entire area. The overconfident elite student struggled to process what was happening, as did a beautiful girl in the crowd, both mesmerized by this sudden turn of events. The girl in white could only stare in disbelief as Rowan materialized out of nowhere. Clayton, however, simply nodded, signaling for him to proceed. He began to say something about a bonus for hitting the target, but the words died in his throat as a surge of power cut him short. In an instant, a gaping hole was torn through the practice dummy, sending a wave of stunned silence through the entire upper class. The elegant young lady and Damien were equally frozen, their minds refusing to accept the impossible sight before them. Leodred's eyes darted to the side, his breath catching as he saw the massive crater blasted into the wall just inches from where he stood. Rowan took a calm, deep breath, then offered a quiet apology, claiming he had unfortunately missed his intended mark. Marlin's mind reeled, unable to process what he was seeing and thinking it was an illusion, while Leodred felt a strange, unsettling sensation. He glanced down, noticing the dummy's support chains had been violently shaken loose by the impact. Our protagonist simply crouched, retrieving another sphere. He remarked that since his last shot was so close, he felt compelled to try again, and began channeling his energy into the new sphere. But the orb shattered, disintegrating into fine dust in his palm, leaving the entire class utterly paralyzed with shock. He casually commented on the faulty equipment, while a frantic Kalen could only stammer a plea for him to stop. Rowan's gaze then locked onto Leodred, his voice low and firm as he warned, "This time, I will be serious. If you don't wish to be struck, I suggest you move." His words hung in the air, punctuated by the intense, otherworldly glow emanating from his spear. Leodred stared in horror at the spectacle as our hero unleashed the projectile, which shot forward with the force of a cannonball. A collective gasp echoed from both the upper and lower class students. Leodred, drawing a sharp breath, barely managed to dodge the incoming sphere, but its true destination was Kalen's head. The impact sent him crashing violently to the ground, overwhelmed by the sheer power. It was a force unimaginable from a simple training sphere. Rowan surveyed the stunned onlookers before speaking. Unfortunate for him, he stated coolly, standing there like a statue. Damien could only watch, his mind struggling to grasp the unfolding chaos. He realized then what he'd suspected all along. Rowan was no ordinary student. The entire academy remained frozen in disbelief. The girl with the striking, rose-colored eyes found herself utterly captivated, unable to look away. The same was true for Marlin, who still could not comprehend how any of it was possible. To have shattered the target, a feat he found impossible, considering his own feeble attempts barely left a scratch. He couldn't comprehend the sphere's near-white color, a purity he'd never seen, and he struggled to understand its nature. He wondered what kind of sorcery Eden had employed to accomplish such a result, or if it was even a trick at all. Because if it wasn't, he was utterly clueless about who this rude Chrissy truly was. Meanwhile, the protagonist, finished warming up, declared the target ruined, and since the official target had been moved, he provocatively suggested they simply choose a new one from the crowd. The other students exchanged confused glances as he began pointing out candidates, starting with a young man who'd made a pathetic attempt to humiliate others. He then gestured toward another, derisively labeling him a coward who only found courage when hiding within a group. Finally, scooping a ball from the ground, his gaze landed on Manon as he declared him the most fitting target of all. Seeing as he had orchestrated this entire special lecture, he promised it would be entertaining. This final taunt sent Manon into a rage, and he roared back in defiance. He bellowed that he would be the one to choose the target, his voice full of malice as he announced the name, Rude Chrissy. He then incited the crowd, screaming for everyone to descend upon him. Dio's heart hammered in his chest as the situation spiraled into chaos. He had to reach his friend, but a firm hand suddenly clamped onto his clothes. He spun around to find Professor Rowell standing there. A wave of relief washed over Dio at the sight of an instructor, and he launched into a desperate explanation of the events unfolding. But she merely silenced him with a gesture, gliding past him and leaving him utterly bewildered by her calm demeanor. "What on earth are you doing?" he demanded, to which she simply replied with a single word, "Observing." He stared in disbelief. A violent confrontation was erupting, and his professor chose to be a spectator rather than a peacekeeper. As he began to protest again, she placed a hand over his mouth, the gesture so full of quiet power that he instantly fell into a deep sleep. With the interruption handled, she returned her full, undivided attention to the spectacle unfolding before her. The first upperclassman took a brutal strike to the face and was sent reeling to the ground. After the throw, the protagonist stood perfectly still. In that moment of stillness, the rest of the students charged him, screaming warnings not to let another one of his magic spheres make contact. Their bravado swells as they close in, but the green-haired aggressor is immediately silenced by a sharp punch to the jaw. His companion follows, taken down by a brutal kick to the face, leaving the final member of their trio frozen in absolute terror. With chilling calm, Rude asks to be let go, and the boy obeys instantly, sending a wave of shock through the entire room. He then makes it clear that his patience has worn thin, issuing a cold warning for no one else to dare touch him. The classroom is stunned into silence by the display, but Manong's expression darkens, furious that the situation has spiraled out of his control. He snarls at his subordinate, demanding if he prepared any magic spheres, and the boy nervously indicates a few on the floor. Manong erupts, calling him an idiot, clarifying that he didn't mean the worthless practice spheres, but the actual combat-grade ones. The underling admits he only has the experimental models, and Manong internally curses his luck, forced to rely on such low-level tools. However, his target is still rude, and he is keenly aware that this boy is far more formidable than he appears. He then bellows for everyone in the hall to focus their fire on the protagonist while concentrating a volatile energy into his own sphere. He launches it with all his might, shouting a promise of a handsome reward for whoever manages to land a successful blow. The orb screams toward Rude, but in a selfless act, Ledasis leaps in front of him, taking the full force of the blast to his chest. The protagonist stares in disbelief, demanding to know why in the world he would throw himself in front of the attack. Manong's face contorts with rage at this interruption, and he roars at his followers, questioning why they are all standing around like fools. They were supposed to attack in unison, all while their instructor continues to observe the escalating chaos from the shadows. While the two are locked in conversation, the other students reluctantly arm themselves with spheres, feeling compelled to obey the order. Rude turns to his wounded friend and asks with biting sarcasm if getting himself pummeled is some kind of hobby. Or do you have some twisted desire to be a victim, he presses. Ledasis, enraged, immediately snaps back that of course he doesn't. A flicker of relief crosses the protagonist's face before he asks again why he took the hit, reminding him, I told you not to interfere. That rule should apply both ways, Rude insists. But Ledasis simply responds with a heavy heart, this is all my fault. In a flash, a sphere hurtles through the air, but our protagonist shoves his colleague aside, snatching the projectile from its path with a bare hand. Staring down the attacker, he seethes, have you lost your mind? As mana crackles around his fist, he declares with chilling intensity, there's nothing I despise more than people like you, who believe you're better than everyone else. The other senior students, far from being deterred, roar for more chaos. Their taunts cut short when one of their own is struck squarely in the head. Another sphere is launched, but our hero can only scoff internally. Their aim is laughably pathetic. He effortlessly scoops up another ball from the ground and, with pinpoint accuracy, sends it crashing into the red-haired bully. The assault doesn't stop there. It has only just begun. He strikes them down one by one, a relentless storm giving them no quarter. In his mind, he tallies the score, a fourth perfect hit. He scans the remaining cowards, wondering how many are left, when a sudden realization hits him. Lucas isn't there. His eyes dart to the side, searching, and there he is. What in the world is that fool doing? He mutters, watching in disbelief as Lucas shields the other students, absorbing the blows meant for them. He strides forward, parting the terrified crowd. Just as he reaches the front, Rin's voice cuts through the tension. Wait, she pleads, her eyes wide with worry. Lucas, he's bleeding. He averts his gaze, attempting to hide his expression, but it doesn't deter her. She closes the distance between them, her voice soft yet firm. Her first request is simple yet bold. Please, untie the ropes holding him. The other students stare, utterly stunned by her courage. Her defiance in the face of the upperclassmen is astonishing, yet her attention is solely on Lucas, to whom she whispers an apology for not being able to do more to help. Lucas looks at her, a flicker of surprise in his weary eyes, but remains silent. In the background, the protagonist resumes his one-man war, methodically taking down the remaining senior students. After felling another bully, he briefly loses count. Was that the 11th takedown, or the 12th? His gaze drifts back towards the others. He notes that only 3 remain standing. As he calmly approaches the last of them, Manon watches, unable to process the scene before her. The entire upper-class group lies defeated on the ground, groaning in pain. She has to wonder if this is all just a dream. A chilling smile plays on our hero's lips as he invites the last few to continue the game. At the same time, Rin finally finishes untying the last of Lucas's bonds. She then gently asks for a moment to speak with him, but a hand suddenly grips her arm. It's her friend, urging her to come back, and as Rin looks over her shoulder, she sees why. The other students are frozen, their faces a mixture of shock and fear at her proximity to the boy they've branded a monster. Rin pauses, taking a steadying breath. Turning to face them, her voice rings out with newfound strength. How long are you going to keep this up? She demands. Do you truly, honestly, believe that Lucas is a monster? She insists that he is no better than any of them, finding their cruelty appalling and declaring that the boy had done nothing to deserve their scorn. She demands to know why they persist in their mistreatment, questioning if their actions are born from a deep-seated fear, a fear of the powerful Harry's family. She admits she might not comprehend the true might of the upperclassmen, but she passionately argues that they cannot allow themselves to be ruled by such intimidation. As her words hung in the air, a student was suddenly flung through the air, crashing to the ground unconscious and sending a ripple of terror through the onlookers. Ledeuces snaps his gaze forward again, his eyes widening in shock to see Rude standing defiantly before Manon. The towering figure scoffs, dismissing the display as pointless, and vowing that Shavel would soon take action against both him and the so-called monster. The protagonist, his patience wearing thin, replies that this talk of monsters is beginning to grate on him. Stepping closer, he begins to speak of those who suffer every day at the hands of others, unable to fight back. He speaks of those who band together, their sole purpose to crush the weak, to render them powerless and miserable. With his voice echoing in the silence, he poses a chilling question. Which of these two is the true monster? And he answers his own question, declaring that the monster's name is Manon. At that exact moment, Dio appears, sprinting and shouting the protagonist's name. As he turns, he comes face to face with a blinding sphere of energy hurtling directly at him. With lightning reflexes, he evades it, and the projectile continues its path with unrestrained force. It strikes Manon square in the face, a perfect, devastating impact. Rude, along with every other student, watches in stunned silence. Manon crumples hard to the ground from the impact, leaving our hero utterly bewildered by the turn of events. His confusion is broken by the sound of approaching footsteps, and he instinctively looks toward the source. He sees the crowd parting for a woman they call Professor Raoul, and a jolt of recognition hits him. He has seen her face before. The memory surfaces the auction house, her fierce battle against Shikmuan. He is floored, never imagining she was a teacher at Helios. Whispers erupt among the students as they wonder if the professor had truly been the one to launch that magical sphere at Manon. A wave of relief washes over them, realizing they are now safe. She then turns her gaze to our hero, her voice cutting through the murmurs, asking, "Why did you dodge?" He was utterly baffled by her question as she produced another sphere, calmly stating that he likely had the power to stop it with ease. She added that simply dodging was no fun at all, a statement that made the cloud-haired boy watch the unfolding scene with wide eyes. He couldn't believe the professor was preparing to throw again. She urged him not to dodge, her voice filled with a burning curiosity that worried the young man deeply. He began to question her true motives, but his thoughts were shattered when the door flew open, and Hale demanded to know what on earth was happening. Their eyes fell upon a scene of chaos, the professor holding a glowing sphere, a target with a gaping hole, and several students unconscious on the floor. A staff member screamed in desperation, "Professor Raoul, what have you done?" But she merely glanced to the side, her expression unreadable. Not understanding a single thing, Dio felt a wave of relief as the tension in the room began to subside. His gaze then shifted, and he saw Rude collapsed on the ground, a sight he couldn't comprehend, while Professor Hale took command of the situation. Hale ordered someone to call the medical team, and for all other students to immediately return to their classrooms. Through it all, Raoul remained unsettlingly silent. Afterwards, a restless energy still lingered among the students throughout the school. Lapis pointed out that all eyes were on them, asking how long they intended to stay put when they should be returning to their territory. Linus retorted that he was almost positive the commotion wasn't about him in the slightest. He also questioned the very idea of their own territory, declaring that all of Helios was theirs before changing the subject. He mentioned seeing something truly amazing during his private training, finding it hard to believe something so cute could mature into a mid-level monster. At this, the blonde-haired boy grew angry and interrupted him. "Are you really going to keep bragging about your private training?" he demanded. The grape-haired boy laughed, but his expression quickly turned serious. He explained that there was something specific he needed to know, turning to Lapis and asking to hear about his encounter with the Dark Mage. Lapis gestured for him to keep his voice down, and, after a moment's thought, replied that he had already told the whole story, it was just a chance meeting. He insisted he had nothing more to add, but Linus rose to his feet, refusing to accept that. "Just give me one detail, like his personality or his interests. Hobbies, anything like that?" Linus pressed. Lapis was completely taken aback by his friend's overwhelming insistence. She questioned his intense curiosity, to which he confessed that the Dark Mage was his ultimate aspiration. He explained that this was the very individual he had spent a long time searching for, admitting he had even tried to secure an audience through Ophion, but the Dark Mage's master would sever ties with anyone even remotely suspicious without a second thought. Lapis felt a chill run down his spine at the revelation. However, he paused, his mind flashing back to the chaotic night they escaped the hall. He recalled Ren's grave words, warning that the situation was dire. She had insisted there would be a serious conversation with their master upon their return. Her voice then cut through his memory, calling out to Blue, asking if he was injured. He assured her that he was fine, As they prepared to move on, Lapis suddenly called out, capturing their attention. He pleaded for them to wait. The pair exchanged puzzled glances as an agitated energy filled Lapis, who realized this could be his one and only chance. Driven by this realization, he began, "I know this is incredibly sudden," his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He then made his plea, "I wish to receive instruction directly from you." Blue was completely taken aback, struggling to process the request. Lapis's voice rose with passion as he declared once more his sincere desire to become the Dark Mage's disciple. He acknowledged the arduous path that lay before him, but his dream of becoming a truly powerful mage burned brighter than ever, and for that purpose, he vowed to dedicate his entire being to upholding the legendary reputation of the famous Dark Mage. However, Ren swiftly cut him off. She offered a sincere apology, stating they simply could not fulfill his request. Lapis's face fell, but she gently explained that the members of Ophion were bound by a solemn duty to focus exclusively on their missions, and according to their strict regulations, they were forbidden from taking on any disciples, making his request an impossibility. Hearing this, the Dark Mage whispered to himself, remembering a time this very thing had happened before, but she gestured for him to remain quiet. As this memory flooded back to him, a wave of intense embarrassment washed over Lapis in the present. He could only cringe, wondering what had possessed him to be so thoughtless. At that very moment, Linus's sharp eyes caught a familiar figure in the distance, announcing that Shavel was right in front of him. At this, Linus rose to his feet to offer a greeting. Shavel acknowledged him with a nod before posing a pointed question. He asked if Linus truly intended to continue associating with the Eternal Eden, sneering that such company was far beneath his station. Lapis, stung by the remark, retorts that it's a far sight better than someone else's childish attempts to cling to power. The grape-haired boy finds this immensely amusing and eagerly shouts to Shavel that Lapis just called him immature. Shavel's irritation grows, clearly annoyed that his supposed friend is deriving so much pleasure from provoking everyone. Turning his back, Shavel begins to walk away, muttering that the display is pathetic and he won't waste another moment on it. The dismissal doesn't sit well with Lapis, who calls out, asking just how long the arrogant boy intends to live in such denial. Linus just laughs, noting that it sounds less like an insult and more like genuine concern, while Anna observes the entire exchange in silence. Meanwhile, in the tense atmosphere of the teacher's lounge, Rude Chrissy stands with Ladocus, facing a pointed interrogation from their instructors. Angelica begins, her tone heavy with disbelief, explaining that she's heard rumors from students about the catastrophic damage to the target wall. She continues, stating that this, along with the condition of the students left on the floor, was supposedly the work of a single person, and turns her gaze to Rude Chrissy. "Is that true?" she demands. He lowers his head, meekly answering that he has no idea what they are talking about. However, Raoul cuts in sharply, grabbing everyone's attention. "You're a mage, aren't you?" The question leaves Ladocus utterly confused, but Rude Chrissy remains perfectly silent. Angelica, for her part, seems to have no idea what Raoul is even suggesting. She reasons that if Rude Chrissy were actually a mage, there would be absolutely no logical reason for him to be at that school. He briefly panics, wondering if he was too reckless and if the teacher somehow sensed his power, but quickly concludes she couldn't have. After all, he hadn't expended a single drop of mana. As the teacher's scrutinizing gaze lingers, he suddenly claims his head is hurting. Angelica's concern immediately overrides her suspicion, suggesting they take him to the infirmary at once. But Raoul insists the boy is fine. The teacher isn't so sure, reminding everyone that it was Raoul herself who had carried Rude Chrissy to the room after he had apparently fainted in the hall. Still feigning his headache, our hero asks for permission to leave. He claims he doesn't understand what they want from him, explaining that he was just surprised to see a magic orb flying straight at him. Due to the shock, he insists, he remembers nothing else. But Raoul has had enough. "Stop lying," she says, her voice cutting through his act. However, Angelica clarifies that for now, Professor Hale will be the one to determine the punishment for the students who were involved in the altercation, and until the situation is fully resolved, both of them are to return to the dormitory and rest. He becomes lost in thought, realizing he's likely to escape any real consequence. He then notices the professor's lingering stare fixed upon him, a look that sends a wave of embarrassment through him. The atmosphere becomes undeniably tense from that point forward. After a moment, the upperclassmen make their way back to their own dormitories. Chauvel is utterly shocked, demanding to know why they look so thoroughly defeated. Claude begins to explain, but a collective tremor of fear ripples through the group. Their eyes are fixed on something just beyond him. Chauvel, failing to grasp the sudden shift, asks why they've become so agitated. Then he looks to the side and sees Rude walking calmly with his friend. Leducis glances over, meeting Chevel's hostile stare. Rude notices the exchange and offers a subtle, knowing smile. The simple gesture fuels the blonde's fury, and Leducis begins to grow anxious. But Rude places a steadying hand on his shoulder, silently urging him to keep moving. After a moment's hesitation, Leducis decides to obey, falling into step with his friend. All the while, Chevel's piercing gaze never leaves them. As they walk, his mind racing, Leducis suddenly comes to a halt. Rude turns, a question in his eyes, asking if something is wrong. He answers that from this moment on, he fears more terrible things will happen, all because of his presence. He confesses it feels as though a monster is whispering in his ear, telling him he brings only misery to those around him. He then warns Rude directly that he will inevitably make him miserable too. Rude simply asks if he's trying to curse him. He tells him to be calm, reminding him that he surely witnessed what had just transpired in the hall. So, without trying to sound arrogant, he states as a matter of fact that even if 100 of the upperclassmen were to attack him at once, nothing would happen to him. Having said that, he makes it absolutely clear that if any trouble does arise, it will not be his friend's fault. Therefore, he needs to stop carrying the weight of others' problems and start focusing on himself. Leducis quietly replies that his friend truly doesn't understand a thing. Rude accepts this, sensing the futility of prying, and decides not to press for answers he knows will never come. However, he makes one thing crystal clear: an unwavering offer of help, whenever it might be needed. Lydius is taken aback by this, but Rude presses on, determined to cut off any self-deprecating protests before they can even be spoken. He vows that no matter the circumstances, he will be there to help, a promise that leaves Lydius lost in deep thought. Lydius cannot fathom why Rude is so insistent, so invested in helping him, and in a moment of pure reflex, the words tumble out. He declares that he doesn't need his help, and in that instant, a heavy silence descends, broken only by Rude's visible flash of irritation. He had just warned him against saying those exact words. The realization hits Lydius a moment too late, and he turns to flee. But Rude is not about to let him escape, immediately giving chase. The scene then shifts, finding the students gathered in their classroom. A girl voices the question on everyone's mind: what will become of them now? A boy speculates that the clad group will surely face consequences, yet he suspects the fallout will also reach the upper-class students. Dallo, meanwhile, simply observes the unfolding drama in silence. The conversation takes a dark turn when the girl questions their involvement, shifting the blame entirely onto the monster, claiming he is the root of all their troubles. The boy quickly agrees, voicing his frustration over why the entire class must suffer for the actions of a single individual. A murmur of agreement ripples through the room, and the girl declares the situation intolerable, suggesting a rather intriguing idea. She proposes they petition the teachers for a class transfer, but the boy scoffs, finding that far too tame for his taste. A far more interesting solution, he suggests, would be to have the monster transferred out of the school entirely, but his cruel words are cut short. An enraged shout from Dio demands to know what they are plotting, followed immediately by Rim, who bellows at them to stop their vile nonsense. The sudden outburst stuns the gossiping students into silence, as Rim confronts them, questioning their profound selfishness and their complete lack of empathy. She masterfully exposes their hypocrisy, pointing out how they despise being ostracized, yet revel in isolating Lydius. She doesn't shy away from their cruel label, monster, forcing them to consider the pain such a name inflicts on a person. Rim leaves them with a final, piercing question. Do they truly believe any of this is Lydius's fault, knowing full well that no one deserves such a title without cause? She insists they all label the boy a monster, yet deep down, they know the truth because they are no different from him. We are all human, with the same fears and feelings. But another classmate cuts in, her voice sharp, reminding them of what they all witnessed. Her words conjure the memory of that fateful day in the library, an event that left every student frozen in terror. High above on the library's upper floor, Chevel and his circle had surrounded a lone figure, Leducis. He was on his knees, a menacing aura pulsing from his body as if he had lost all consciousness. The memory alone sends a shiver through the room. With a trembling voice, she challenges her. How can you just dismiss that? We were all terrified. Rin struggles for a response, but before she can speak, a calm voice cuts through the tension from across the room. It was illusion magic, Isla states plainly. She elaborates, reminding them that Chevel's renowned specialty is illusion magic, that he was even hailed as a prodigy with magic orbs. Therefore, she concludes, a mage of his caliber could easily conjure such a convincing spectacle. Closing her book with a soft snap, she rises to her feet. She then challenges everyone to think logically for a moment, pointing out that if Leducis were genuinely dangerous, the Academy's administration would have never permitted his enrollment. Yet, she observes, it seems none of them bothered to consider that simple fact. The students are taken aback, the undeniable logic hitting them for the first time. Isla, her gaze unyielding, presses her advantage. She accuses them of hiding behind the monster label simply because they are afraid of the upper-class students, or perhaps, of Shavel himself. Unable to accept the accusation, the other girl fires back, retorting that her supposedly brave classmate has done nothing and is just as complacent as the rest of them. You're right, Isla concedes calmly. I am just like you. However, she continues, a new fire in her eyes. The circumstances have now changed. The shock of that day made you all forget one crucial detail. She makes it perfectly clear. With Rude now in their class, they hold the power to completely alter the status quo. A wave of surprise ripples through the students at her declaration, a silence that is shattered when Leducis himself materializes in the doorway, startling everyone. Someone nervously whispers if he's a ghost. Just then, our protagonist enters behind him, only to find every single eye in the room locked on them. He is utterly bewildered by the sudden, intense scrutiny. From the crowd, Dio's eyes widen in disbelief as he recognizes Rude. He rushes over, his voice laced with concern, asking if they're all right. The protagonist confirms he is, though feeling a bit dizzy and utterly embarrassed by the scene. But the silver-haired figure clarifies, his gaze skyward, warning that he was actually talking about the clouds. Seizing the opportunity, Leducis tries to flee once more. The protagonist, however, refuses to let him escape. In that moment, a girl approaches, uttering a single, chilling word, monster. She quickly retracts, offering an apology before asking if the boy's name is indeed Leducis, and then turns to our hero, inquiring if he is the one known as Rude Chrissy. Extending a graceful hand, she introduces herself as Yell Florin Chrome, expressing a sincere, heartfelt hope that they can all become friends. As he accepts her handshake, the protagonist is puzzled by her words, failing to grasp what she truly means by getting along. Just then, another boy from their class timidly asks for a moment of their time and, with a touch of embarrassment, introduces himself as Noiden. He echoes the sentiment, also asking that they get along. Following his lead, both Ekel and Julia step forward to introduce themselves. Rude becomes completely bewildered, realizing that a large circle of classmates has suddenly and unexpectedly formed around them. One by one, they state their names, their voices buzzing with curiosity, as they ask about the chaotic events that had just unfolded in the hall. Only two students hold back, sneering that they see no point in allying themselves with someone they consider a monster. Rin watches with a pleased expression, happy that most of the class is choosing the right path. At that moment, someone calls out for Leducis. It was two students. They wanted to talk to him about his heroic act, how he had shielded the entire class from the magic orbs by putting his own body on the line. For his selfless bravery, they offer their deepest, most heartfelt thanks. He is visibly stunned by this, as is our protagonist. A faint smile touches the hero's lips as he sees that events are turning out far better than he ever anticipated. Sometime later, in the infirmary, Menon finally awakens. Chavel, who was seated faithfully by his side, immediately questions the group's actions, sternly reminding them that he never asked for their help. The boy apologizes profusely, stating that he is prepared to take full responsibility for everything that happened. However, he insists that he is fine, accepting that what has transpired is in the past, and there is nothing left to be done. He then falls silent, his mind drifting back to a conversation he had earlier, a memory of being summoned to the teacher's office. He recalled himself vehemently, denying any involvement with the accident, while Hale, offering a knowing smile, assured him that she understood, and that, if necessary, there would be no issue with enacting a punishment against Marlin and the imbeciles in Neville's circle. As the penalty is mandated by school regulations, Neville instantly grasps the situation's gravity, and without a moment's pause, he inquires about the teacher's demands, who is pleased by his swift comprehension. Marlin notices his friend lost in thought and questions if something is wrong. Neville reveals he's heard about the upcoming training session. It's for the lower class students, but a few from the upper class are slated to join them. And though the teacher's full intention remains unclear, he knows Hale wants him present, his aura turning menacing as he speaks. He declares it the perfect chance to demonstrate the consequences for those who dare to challenge his authority. However, Marlin interrupts his dark thoughts, wanting to discuss Kane, admitting that no matter how he analyzes it, he can't possibly view him as just an ordinary boy, and feels it's crucial to voice his concerns. Neville's expression sours at this, questioning if Marlin took such a hard blow to the head that it scrambled his senses. He sneers at the very notion, finding it absurd that his supposed colleague is suggesting caution is needed when dealing with a mere student from the lower echelons of the academy. Anna urges him to remain calm, but the blonde dismisses her, telling her not to fret over such trivial matters. He promises he will have some very interesting news to share with them all soon enough. Later that night, in the dorms, Kane reflects on his mission, wondering if he is truly making progress as he recalls the bizarre stream of students approaching him. He marvels at the strangeness of it all, and how, finally, people were engaging with Alistair. He turns, his gaze settling on his sleeping roommate, pondering the silent burdens the boy carried. He doesn't know the full weight of what Alistair endures alone, but prays the small shift that occurred today might have offered him some small measure of relief, before finally surrendering to sleep himself. Just then, a sinister shadow seeps into the room, gliding silently toward Alistair before it begins to coalesce into a dark, foreboding figure. It whispers a chilling warning of its imminent arrival. But in a flash, our hero materializes behind the entity, slamming it to the ground with a powerful grip and demanding to know what in the world it is. The shadow glances back, a detail that snags his attention. But in that very instant, the figure begins to dissolve, fading into nothingness right before his eyes. He's left grappling with the encounter, trying to piece together what just happened and what that shadow could have possibly wanted with Ladosis. He questions if this is yet another one of Chevel's schemes, his gaze falling upon his friend, desperate to understand what ordeal the boy has been put through. The following day at the academy, two young ladies were strolling through the halls, one of them voicing her anxiety that they would likely cross paths with the rumored monster on the training grounds. As they chatted, their conversation was cut short when they spotted something unusual. Both Lydosis and Rude were heading in the very same direction. The blue-haired girl tensed with worry, but her companion boldly called out a greeting, leaving her friend utterly stunned. Lydosis, however, freezes up, unsure how to respond, and simply shuffles past them in awkward silence. Just then, the protagonist approaches them, flashing a disarming smile that leaves both girls momentarily speechless. He continues on his way, calling out to his friend and reminding him that when someone offers a greeting, it's proper to return it. He then casually asks if Ladosis felt anything out of the ordinary when he went to bed the previous night, causing his friend to turn to him in confusion. The hero quickly tells him to forget it, but internally, his mind is racing, trying to make sense of that shadowy apparition. He reflects on how it vanished without a single trace, and while he's certain it was a product of some powerful magic, he feels Ladosis is completely oblivious to what's happening. He also can't shake the shadow's ominous words, "It's coming soon." A deep sense of foreboding washes over him, a feeling that great danger is on the horizon, but he debates whether he should even inform the school authorities. After all, he has no tangible evidence to support his claims. For now, he decides the most prudent course of action is to discuss the unsettling event with his master. At that exact moment, he realizes Lydosis is just staring at him intently, and the two of them are just standing there awkwardly in the middle of the crowded corridor. Our hero apologizes, admitting he didn't realize his friend was waiting, especially since Lydosis had been actively avoiding him the entire day before. Suddenly, a boisterous and cheerful Dio bursts onto the scene. Rude offered a casual good morning, prompting the newcomer to approach hesitantly, a blush creeping up their face as they managed to greet Ladocis as well. A thick silence filled the space until Rude broke it, commanding Ladocis to return the greeting, a task that required a noticeable effort. Ladocis finally managed to utter a good morning, earning a curt, "That's how it's done" from Rude. But to Dio, the entire exchange felt unsettlingly familiar. It was like watching someone ask a small dog for its paw, only to patronizingly praise it with a good job for simple obedience. Just then, a group of students appeared, calling out a greeting to Rude before informing him that teacher Raoul was looking for him. Rude's expression soured at the news, and he simply told his friends to pretend they hadn't heard a thing, a reaction Dio observed with keen interest. He was genuinely surprised, having no idea that his quiet friend was already so familiar with other people in the academy. After the other boys said their goodbyes, Rude glanced over his shoulder, calling out to Dio to ask what he was still doing standing there. He questioned if Dio planned on joining them. Dio held his silence for a moment, a slow, knowing smile spreading across his face. Then, he proposed a challenge, a race to see who could reach the classroom first, and just like that, they were off. When they arrived, teacher Raoul stood before the class, his voice grave as he announced that those involved in the recent incident would receive their due punishment. He issued a stern warning, making it clear he never wanted a repeat of such events. He then urged them all to cast aside those unpleasant memories. They needed to be erased. he insisted, his face breaking into a smile so they could focus their minds on preparing for the upcoming training. He spoke vaguely about the unpredictability of the future, but Dio was growing bored, having no context for what he was supposed to be preparing for. He leaned over to Rude, quietly asking just what kind of field training this was supposed to be. When he wondered if they would have to fight monsters, Ladocus interjected, reassuring him that the teachers wouldn't orchestrate anything that terrifying. He admitted his own confusion about the details, but remained certain that their superiors would design the training thoughtfully. He was sure they would calibrate the difficulty to each student's level, though he confessed he couldn't imagine how that would work for someone like Rude. In that precise moment, Teacher Raoul appeared directly behind them, his voice cutting through their conversation. Both Dio and Ladocus jumped, startled by his sudden presence. The professor's only instruction was a curt, "Follow me," leaving our protagonist to glance back, completely bewildered. In another part of the grounds, Utarian casually informed her attendant during a meal that Tessie had found something fascinating, immediately sparking his curiosity. She explained that Tessie was headed for the Eden's training field, adding with a knowing look that she herself intended to make an appearance. The servant could only cry out in disbelief, while at that very moment, the professor was physically dragging our hero along by the collar of his uniform. He had, after all, failed to immediately obey her command to follow her just outside the academy walls. Lapis took in the burgeoning crowd of students, his voice cutting through the murmurs as he asked why so many people were gathered. A nearby student quickly supplied the answer, explaining that Professor Raoul was rumored to be dueling a student from the lower division. A jolt of panic shot through him at the news, his mind racing to figure out who the unfortunate student could possibly be. His friend placed a hand on his shoulder, telling him to calm down, and explaining it was the very student who had become the talk of the academy. After a moment's thought, the name clicked. "You mean Chris?" he asked, just as the confrontation was reaching its climax. At that instant, Leo stepped forward, placing himself between the professor and our hero, his voice firm as he demanded why she would challenge a student who was blameless. He insisted it was unjust, but her ice-cold stare and a single command to disappear was enough to make him immediately retreat. As he fell back behind Ladocus, the cloud-haired boy whispered nervously, questioning if everything was truly going to be all right. Our protagonist, meanwhile, could only think that while he'd expected trouble, he never imagined the professor's obsession would lead to this. He glanced at the sea of expectant faces, then down at his sword, and a sudden realization dawned. This was a perfect opportunity. It was his chance to prove to everyone how utterly unremarkable he was, so they would finally leave him alone. As he had this thought, the professor readied herself. With the sharp ring of her blade being drawn, she ordered the duel to begin, sending a fresh wave of panic crashing over him. He couldn't wrap his head around the sheer unfairness of it all. Why was he holding a mere wooden practice sword while she brandished a live blade? Raoul's voice urged him to use magic, assuring him it would be fine, but before a single word of protest could leave his lips, she attacked. Frustration boiled within him at her refusal to listen, but he decided it was better to simply let her have her way and make a convincing show of losing. He is forced to narrowly evade the blow, a chilling realization washing over him. If that strike had connected, it would have left him with far more than just a scar. He desperately shouts for her to wait, to just listen, but his pleas are lost in the wind. Meanwhile, the student onlookers murmur in astonishment, witnessing a first-year student deftly avoid a professor's relentless attacks. Lapis shares their disbelief, his eyes wide with shock. Professor Raoul's voice cuts through the air, ordering him to fight properly as she lunges again, making it clear she will show no mercy. The blow descends with blinding speed, so fast that Dio can only scream a warning for his friend to watch out. On pure instinct, Rude raises his wooden sword, parrying the steel blade and leaving both of them stunned, especially himself. He is immediately dismayed by his own reflexive defense as the wooden sword groans under the pressure, cracking before it finally splinters apart. The sound captures the attention of Rin and her friend for a moment before she turns and retreats. Seeing the aftermath, Lapis admits he was terrified. The sheer audacity of stopping the professor's sword, even for a moment with a mere training weapon, sent a shiver down his spine. Professor Raoul steps back, her voice sharp as she orders everyone not to interfere, warning that it will be dangerous. Dio immediately fires back, shouting that it was only dangerous because no one had stepped in sooner, gesturing to the two broken halves of the wooden sword. She challenges Rude to try one more time, assuring him his weapon won't break if he channels his magic. But our hero instantly refuses the duel. When she demands to know why, he explains that he never even wanted to participate in the first place. He insists that he lacks the necessary skill, and Dio quickly chimes in, adding that Rude's body is too frail to exert itself. Raoul retorts that the boy was moving with perfect composure, but the cloud-haired young man insists it was merely her imagination. Lapis and his companion watch the exchange, bewildered. They comment on how they have never seen the professor act with such insistence. They also realize that Rude had undeniably blocked Professor Raoul's sword, and though it was a non-magical assault, he had somehow managed to withstand the full force of a seasoned instructor. Yet, Raoul continues to demand they fight, until Lapis, seeing no other choice, steps forward. After respectfully getting the professor's attention, he reminds her that she is not the kind of person to force someone to act against their will. Humbled by her power, he bows deeply, voicing his desire to learn from her, but the professor immediately shuts him down. She responds with a cold refusal, casting an awkward silence over the area as he turns away. Stunned by her rudeness, the protagonist simply watches. A flicker of recognition passes through him. He is almost certain he has seen the blonde boy somewhere before. At that moment, the professor states, "There are too many distractions." She declares they will settle things next time, leaving with the chilling assurance that there will be more than enough time for that. The group gathers once more, and Dio notices Rin appearing as if from nowhere. She explains that she heard a strange noise and was drawn by it. She asks if they are all right. The heir of the C family replies that they are, casually commenting that Professor Raoul was just trying to eliminate Liam. Aside from that, he adds, "Everything is fine." Rin is visibly shocked to hear something so serious spoken with such nonchalance. All this happened while, a short distance away, Lapis was crying to his own group, dejected at having been so harshly rejected. For Liam, the pieces fall into place. His suspicion was correct. Professor Raoul is the very same person he encountered at the auction. Back then, she had taken the form of the Black Mage. Unsettled, Rin presses on, asking again if they are truly okay. When her question is met with a prolonged silence, she feels a pang of embarrassment. She had only rushed over out of concern, forgetting to even introduce herself first. However, the protagonist already knows exactly who she is. He speaks her name, Rin, and asks if, by chance, she happened to receive a letter from her brother, Ben. Surprise flashes across her face, followed by a bright, happy smile. She admits that deep down, she suspected he was the one who sent it. Her suspicion arose because he was mentioned by name within the letter. Listening in, Dio's expression is one of pure confusion. She smiles warmly, thanking him for everything, explaining how much receiving that letter from her brother meant to her. Liam replies that it was no problem at all, but the silver-haired young man's curiosity is clearly piqued. He can't understand their connection. At that moment, the girl's friend appears, running toward the gathering. She asks why everyone is crowded together. Dio answers that it was a rather complicated situation. The professor called Liam out of nowhere for a fight. As the others react, Liam looks to the side and directs his words to Leduces, that he owes his life to Leo, grateful that he intercepted the devastating blow. Leo simply agrees, acknowledging that if the prince hadn't deflected the initial attack, the outcome would have been catastrophic. He reflects on this, and a faint smile graces his lips, born from the satisfaction of helping. Everyone stares, astonished, for they had never seen him smile before. In that moment, the bond between them strengthens. Elsewhere, the Academy's instructors are gathered for a serious discussion. One of them asks if the issue at the tower has been fully resolved. A senior teacher confirms that it has, and in fact, it seems no significant changes to their plans will be necessary. The inquiring teacher finds this to be very welcome news. Her eyes scan the list of chosen participants: Jasper Hadelio, Anna Burbage, Linus Graham, and Cindy Amass. She questions if it will only be the usual members, her expression turning thoughtful as she reads that Jasper will also be present. The senior teacher explains they are currently in a recess period, which is why there are so few upper-class students on campus. The headmaster questions the reasoning behind, including Jasper. Professor Hale steps forward, explaining that the lower-class training will be on an entirely different level this time. It will be the first instance of having so many students involved in such an exercise. The plan involves teleportation and a joint class with the tower, a complex scenario where he believed unexpected events could arise. For that reason, he decided to select the most skilled upper-class students to provide support, he emphasizes. He assures them his decision wasn't made unilaterally and firmly believes it will be an invaluable experience. He notes it's an opportunity from which Jasper, in particular, will learn a great deal. The headmistress says she truly hopes there are no problems. She then inquires about the teleporter's condition. He just smiles and assures her it is in perfect working order, much to her relief. This is paramount, as she deeply desires the training to strengthen the relations between the tower and the academy. And so, she wants the teachers to personally accompany the students, enabling them to perform at their absolute best. Later that night, our protagonist holds the communication stone, a frown creasing his brow as to why his master is not answering. He has urgent matters to discuss, including the ominous black shadow he discovered in the room and the troubling behavior of Professor Rowell. With no answers forthcoming and a creeping fear that the shadow might strike Lettuces again, he decided to return to their room. He reflected that ever since the shadow's first appearance, his world had spiraled into a storm of complex events. Yet, even in the midst of the chaos, he could see a silver lining, a strange sort of good that had bloomed from the trouble. Miraculously, their circle of friendship was expanding, for him and for Lettuces. He hurried back, pushing open the door with his thoughts still racing. With his master unresponsive, he felt utterly adrift, wondering if he should risk sending a letter as he stepped into the quiet room. A jolt of surprise shot through him at the sight of Lettuces sitting silently in a chair. He quickly masked his shock, casually asking when his friend had woken. He explained he'd just gone for a short walk, an old habit of his, and even offered for Lettuces to join next time, but his words were met with unnerving silence. For a moment, Lettuces finally said, his voice low, "I thought you had left." As he rose, Rude demanded, "And where in the world would I go?" Lettuces offered no reply, simply crossing to his bed and lying down, plunging the room into a deep quiet. The protagonist confessed to himself just how startled he truly was. After stowing his shirt, he also lay down, but the heavy silence was too much. He called out his friend's name, hoping to break the tension by talking about training. He brought up how the exercises were typically conducted in teams of 4, and if that method remained the same this year, then the two of them could almost certainly be on the same team. Lettuces seemed genuinely surprised by the prospect, but after a moment's consideration, he raised a valid point, asking how it would work with Dio in the picture. If the boy joined them, their team would consist of 3, leaving one spot to be filled. Rude playfully asked, "By any chance, are you that worried about your grade?" He quickly added that he was only joking, admitting that Lettuces was right. They would indeed need to find one more member for their squad. Elsewhere, in the dead of night, within the opulent Lettuces mansion, a man named Lispin cautiously approached his mistress. Once he had her attention, he voiced his concern, questioning why he was plagued by such a terrible premonition about the coming days. The following day, a messenger pigeon descended from the sky, delivering a sealed letter directly into an awaiting hand. It was Ruby Monter, who breathed a sigh of relief at its arrival. She immediately began to read, knowing it contained the news she had been waiting for. The letter cryptically mentioned that the food was exquisite, and that she'd even amused herself with the humans, but complained that the class was dreadfully boring and the room suffocating. Yearning for home, she grows increasingly irritated by the document's contents, finally snapping and cutting the power, plunging her house into darkness. "What kind of report is this?" she mutters into the gloom. Meanwhile, at the academy, a crowd of students buzzes with energy, but Rude remains detached, lost in thought. It was unnerving. Several days had passed, and he still couldn't establish contact with his master. The silence felt ominous. He couldn't help but wonder if something terrible had befallen Ophion. At that very moment, Dio appeared, calling out, "Professor Hale's class is moving out first." Rude was impressed by the palpable excitement in the air, and asked Dio, "By any chance, haven't you heard the news?" He revealed that the training would be held at the Magic Tower. Rude, however, felt a sense of foreboding, unable to comprehend the situation. Why would the prestigious Magic Tower ever involve itself with a mere magic school, especially for something as fundamental as beginner training? The idea struck him as utterly impossible. The logic simply didn't add up, and it felt fundamentally wrong. While Dio engaged in a conversation with Lettuces, Rude's thoughts drifted to the enigmatic shadow that had once appeared in his room. Although it had never returned, he couldn't shake the suspicion that it was somehow connected to Lettuces. He promised himself he would uncover the truth after the training. "Why aren't we in teams for this?" Dio suddenly asked. "We would have been the most formidable team of all." Just then, AIL materialized out of thin air, proclaiming, "I also worked diligently to prepare." The group was left speechless by her sudden appearance, but she continued, explaining that according to the documents she had reviewed, she had anticipated they would be organized into teams for the training, only to discover the plans had been altered at the last minute. "And the rumor about us going to the Magic Tower is definitely true," she confirmed, adding, "I was planning to assemble the perfect team of gifted mages. Which is precisely why I found this change so disappointing," she concluded. Rude was completely baffled by her declaration. She then added directly to him, "You would have been my first recruit." He still couldn't process what was happening. "I appreciate the consideration," he stammered. AIL then glanced dismissively at Dio and stated, "You, however, would not have been invited." Rude's gaze shifted away, and he noticed Lytus acting strangely. What's gotten into him, he wondered aloud, as other students began to stare. It was only then that Rude noticed the cause of the commotion. An imposing group of upper-class students, led by Shavel, was marching past them. Leo surveyed the scene, his eyes wide with surprise at the sheer number of upperclassmen, commenting that the rumors about the Harriers' participation were apparently true. Rode, however, grew pensive, his mind working to understand the implications. He couldn't comprehend why Shavel, of all people, would take part, questioning whether it was mere coincidence or something more calculated. Was the brash nobleman plotting something? His gaze then shifted, catching the worried look on Lydusus's face. With a faint, reassuring smile, he told his friend not to worry. He reasoned that the teachers would also be at the test site, ensuring nothing could go wrong. The MC remained silent. In his mind, however, he saw this as a perfect opportunity to deal with the arrogant blonde. A professor's voice cut through the crowd, calling the upperclassmen to attention. She warned them that although they were Harriers, they were strictly forbidden from acting on their own initiative. Therefore, she politely requested that they follow the instructions of the supervising teachers, herself included. Her gaze then moved forward, emphasizing that this message was primarily for Chavel. He was instructed to make sure he behaved himself. "I already know," he retorted, and she began to walk away, wondering to herself why Professor Hale had summoned a known troublemaker like Shavel to this place. Nearby, Raoul and Yuti stood watching. The professor called for Yuti's attention, who turned and asked what was the matter. The professor questioned where Ram was. "I tied him up to make sure he behaves," she answered, before asking, "So, where is this boy Tessie talked so much about?" Her eyes fixed intensely on Rode, a stare that Leo immediately noticed from his position. He shouted to Rode that Professor Raoul was there, but by the time they looked again, the MC was already in full sprint, leaving even Lydusus utterly confused. In that moment of bewilderment, someone approached and touched his arm. It was Rin. She wanted to know if something had happened to make Rode take off so suddenly. But before she could finish her sentence, the professor herself dashed past them, chasing after the MC. Rin couldn't help but laugh at the absurd situation. She then grabbed Lydusus's arm, urging him to go with her. After the students had gathered, a teacher approached Hale. He confirms that students from both the lower and upper classes have all arrived. With the remainder already en route, he finds it quite satisfying that all preparations are finally complete. He declares that they can now begin, and as the words are spoken, a sinister shadow materializes behind the instructor. The instructor, puzzled by the cryptic statement, turns, only for Hale to offer a cold apology, clarifying that his words were not meant for him. Still struggling to comprehend the situation, the instructor attempts to ask what is happening but is abruptly engulfed by the encroaching shadow. He is consumed in an instant, while the bespectacled figure observes the grim spectacle with detached amusement before the eyes of all the students. Though from their distant vantage point, they remain oblivious, their attention instead captured by the unveiling of a gigantic, pulsating magical stone. Dio remarks in awe that he has never laid eyes on one of such a massive scale, while Rin whispers that it feels more terrifyingly real with each passing moment. She then asks if their journey to the magic tower is truly about to commence, as a young man with cloud-white hair scans the crowd, unable to locate Rude. While the students stare in collective wonder, Lapis moves closer to the magic circle, his analytical gaze dissecting its every detail. He remarks that it perfectly aligns with Professor Momo Ray's theory, as detailed in The Truth of the Magic Circle. He identifies it as a typical teleporter that operates with 10 manning, but notes the unusual presence of separate, layered formulas. This construction implies an incredibly advanced design, a combination so unique that even he is witnessing it for the very first time. Everyone is taken aback by Lapis's profound understanding, their surprise interrupted only when our protagonist appears, calmly identifying the combination as Fanode. He elaborates that it is a novel formulaic combination, which utilizes UL's formula as its foundational structure. This design allows its user to connect and simultaneously activate a minimum of 5 different magic circles. And, he adds, from what he understands, it is a technique entirely unsuitable for teleportation circles. At this, Lapis stands, asking if he is the one who challenged Professor Raoul. Fixing his gaze upon him, he demands a more thorough explanation of how the intricate structure actually functions. He presses for details on the mechanism that enables the simultaneous activation of multiple, complex, magic circles. Furthermore, he inquires if it is based on the theoretical principle of Belzard's aspects, as Rude's intense focus remains locked on the magic circle itself, and a knot of unease begins to form in his stomach, a strange sensation that quickly blossoms into full-blown dread. The blonde-haired student continued his explanation, noting how a recent conference had covered the linked activation of magic circles. He was delving into the proposed solutions for the complex issues that arose from combining different magical formulas. Our hero moved to interrupt him, an urgent thought on his mind, but was stopped short when a hand suddenly gripped his arm. It was Yudari, exclaiming that she'd caught him, while also joyfully calling out Tessie's name. She declared she'd finally found him, but her cheerfulness faltered as she noticed the professor standing completely still, prompting her to ask if something was wrong. At that moment, Dio and his friends appeared, their usual rude remarks dying on their lips as the entire group was startled by a creeping shadow. It started to bleed into existence in the middle of the room, a dark anomaly that left everyone scrambling to understand what was happening. Tessie immediately ran toward Eutherion for safety, while Lapis looked on in terror, her fear completely justified. A malevolent shadow was now coalescing directly above the circle, and our hero watched intently, a grim recognition dawning in his eyes. He knew what this entity was, even before it fully materialized, a sight that made even the elite upper-class students question what they were seeing. They wondered aloud if this was some unscheduled event, a confusion that rippled through the ranks of the lower-class students as well. They were utterly baffled, confronted by an enormous, shadowy figure, unlike anything they had ever encountered before. The monster raised its spectral hand, conjuring a violent whirlwind that blasted outwards in all directions. Panic erupted as students screamed, questioning if this was still the training area, and if the test had already begun. Ludus was also gripped by fear, but our hero stepped forward, planting himself in front of his classmates, and issuing a firm command for them not to leave his back. Across the hall, Professor Hale dramatically threw his glasses to the floor, his face twisted not with fear, but with a look of manic glee. He declared his intent to achieve his own goal, just as a colossal magical quadrant blazed to life on the ceiling above. The whirlwind intensified, spawning several more vortexes as he ominously warned that the gate would soon open. Then he vanished, leaving another desperate instructor to scream for everyone to evacuate the area immediately. In the chaos, Chevel's confused voice shouts out, questioning if the terrifying shadow that appeared is some kind of test from the teachers. Her reply is sharp and filled with dread. "This is no test," she insists. Something is terribly wrong, and she once again begs everyone to flee the area together. Their escape, however, is cut short. They are stopped in their tracks as a violent whirlwind materializes, completely blocking the path to the door. The students are frozen with fear, unsure of what to do as the maelstrom intensifies, forcing them to shut their eyes in sheer desperation. When they dare to open them again, they see Professor Khan, who has erected a powerful magic shield to protect them from the onslaught. "My real name is Damien," she declares, as the shadowy figure continues its silent vigil from a distance. As her hair begins to change color, a sign of her power, the woman demands to know how it dares to cause such a disturbance. "This is the Helios Academy," she warns, staring directly at the monster. "You had better be prepared for the consequences of this intrusion." Our hero observes that the shape of the teleportation circle seems altered, but then a chilling realization dawns on him. It didn't change because of the shadow. Rather, this corruption was planned from the very start. He considers the horrifying possibility that it was orchestrated by someone from within Helios Academy. Or perhaps, he theorizes, the shadow is connected to a much darker conspiracy. At that very moment, Damien appears, running frantically. She is desperately pleading for Professor Raoul's help, admitting that she herself is not a combat-type mage. Without warning, the shadow makes its first move, aiming its attack directly at Ledus, a lethal strike our protagonist immediately perceives. If you're enjoying the story, please remember to subscribe and hit the bell for more content. Thanks for your support.